Hey Lou, we're back with another reading. This time, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. We have completed like 132 pages. Let's just get right into it. Sometimes, while meditating on these things in solitude, I've got up in sudden terror and put on my bonnet to go and see how all was at the farm. I persuaded my conscience that it was a duty to warn him how people talked regarding his ways, and then I recollected his confirmed bad habits, and hopeless of benefiting him, have flinched from re-entering the dismal house, doubting if I could bear to be taken at my word. One time I passed the old gate, going out of my way on a journey to Gimmerton. It was about the period that my narrative has reached. A bright frosty afternoon, the ground bare and the road hard and dry. I came to a stone where the highway branches off onto the moor at your left hand, a rough sand pillar with the letters WH cut on its north side on the east and G on the southwest and TG. It serves as a guidepost to the Grange and Heights and village. The sun shone yellow on its grey head, reminding me of summer, and I cannot say why, but all at once a gush of child sensations flowed into my heart. Hindley and I held at a favorite spot 20 years before. I gazed long at the weather-worn block, and stooping down, perceived a hole near the bottom, still full of snail shells and pebbles, which we were very fond of storing there with more perishable things and as fresh as reality. It appeared that I beheld my early playmate seated on a withered turf, his dark square head bent forward and his little hand scooping out the earth with a piece of slate. Poor Hindley! I exclaimed involuntarily. I started. My bodily eye was seated into a momentary belief that the child lifted its face and stared straight into mine. It vanished in a twinkling, but immediately I felt an irresistible yearning to be at the heights. Superstition urged me to comply with this impulse. Supposing he should be dead, I thought, or should die soon, supposing it were a sign of death. The nearer I got to the house, the more agitated I grew, and on catching sight of it, I trembled in every limb. The apparition had outstripped me. It stood looking through the gate. That was my first idea on observing an elf-locked, brown-eyed boy setting his ruddy countenance against the barns. Further reflection suggested this must be Harridan, my Harridan, not altered greatly since I left him 10 months since. God bless thee, darling, I cried, forgetting instantaneously my foolish fears. Harridan, it's Nellie, Nellie, thy nurse. He retreated out of arm's length and picked up a large flint. I am come to see my father, Harridan, I added, guessing from the action that Nellie, if she lived in his memory at all, was not recognized as one with me. He raised his missile to hurl it. I commenced a soothing speech, but could not stay his hand. The stone struck my bonnet, and then ensued from the stammering lips of the little fellow a string of curses which, whether he comprehended them or not, were delivered with practiced emphasis and distorted his baby features into a shocking expression of malignity. You may be certain his this grieved you may be certain this grieved more than angered me. Fit to cry, I took an orange from my pocket and offered it to propitiate him. He hesitated and then snatched it from my hold, as if he fancied I only intended to tempt and disappoint him. I showed another, keeping it out of his reach. Who has taught you those fine words, my brain? I inquired. The curate? Damn the curate and thee. Give me that, he replied. Tell us where you got your lessons and you'll have it, said I. Well, who's your master? Devil Daddy, was his answer. And what do you learn from Daddy? I continued. He jumped at the fruit. I raised it higher. What does he teach you? I asked. Not, said he, but to keep out of his gate. Daddy cannot bite me because I swear at him. Ah, and the devil teaches you to swear at Daddy? I observed. Ah, nay. He drawled. Who then? Heathcliff. I asked if he liked Mr. Heathcliff. Aye, he answered again. Desiring to have reasons for liking him, I could only gather the sentences. I know he pays Dad back what he guides to me. He curses Dad for cursing me. He says I might do as well. And the curate does not teach you to read and write then, I pursued. No, I was told the curate should have his teeth dashed down his throat if he stepped over the threshold. Heathcliff had promised that. I put the orange in his hand and bade him tell his father that a woman called Nellie Dean was waiting to speak with him by the garden gate. He went up the walk and entered the house, but instead of Hindley, Heathcliff appeared on the door stones, and I turned directly and ran down the road as hard as ever I could race, making no halt till I gained the guidepost, and feeling as scared as if I had raised a goblin. This is not much connected with Mrs. Isabella's affair, except that it urged me to resolve further on mounting Wuthering Guard and doing my utmost to check the spread of such bad influence at the Grange, even though I should wake a domestic storm by thwarting Mrs. Linton's pleasure. But the next time Heathcliff came, my young lady chanced to be feeding some pigeons in the court. She had never spoken word to her sister-in-law for 3 days, but she had likewise dropped her fretful complaining, and we found it a great comfort. Heathcliff had not the habit of bestowing a single unnecessary civility on Miss Linton, I knew. Now, as soon as he beheld her, his first precaution was to take a sweeping survey of the house front. I was standing by the kitchen window, but I drew out of sight. He then stepped across the pavement to her and said something. She seemed embarrassed and desirous of getting away. To prevent it, he laid his hand on her arm. She averted her face. He apparently put some question which she had no mind to answer. There was another rapid glance at the house, and supposing himself unseen, the scoundrel had the impudence to embrace her. Judas, traitor! I ejaculated. You're a hypocrite, too, are you? A deliberate deceiver. Who is Nellie? Said Catherine's voice at my elbow. I had been overintent on watching the pair outside to mark her entrance. Your worthless friend, I answered warmly. The sneaking rascal yonder. Ah, he has caught a glimpse of us. He is coming in. I wonder will he have the art to find a plausible excuse for making love to Miss when he told you he hated her. Mrs. Linton saw Isabella tear herself free and run into the garden, and a minute after Heathcliff opened the door. I couldn't withhold giving some loose to my indignation, but Catherine angrily insisted on silence and threatened to order me out of the kitchen if I did be so presumptuous as to put in my insolent tongue. To hear you, people might think you were the mistress, she cried. You were sitting down in your right place, Heathcliff. What are you about, raising the stir? I said you must let Isabella alone. I beg you will, unless you are tired of being received here and wish Linton to draw the bolts against you. God forbid that he should try, answered the black villain. I detested him just then. God keep him meek and patient. Every day I grow madder after sending him to heaven. Hush, said Catherine, shutting the inner door. Don't vex me. Why have you disregarded my request? Did she come across you on purpose? What is it to you? He growled. I have a right to kiss her if she chooses, and you have no right to object. I'm not your husband. You needn't be jealous of me. I'm not jealous of you, replied the mistress. I'm jealous for you. Clear your face. You shan't scowl at me. If you like Isabella, you shall marry her. But do you like her? Tell the truth, Heathcliff. There, you won't answer. I'm certain you don't. And would Mr. Linton approve of his sister marrying that man? I inquired. Mr. Linton should approve, returned my lady decisively. He might spare himself the trouble, said Heathcliff. I could do as well without his approbation. And as to you, Catherine, I have a mind to speak a few words now while we're at it. I want you to be aware that I know you have treated me infernally, do you hear? And if you flatter yourself that I don't perceive it, you are a fool. And if you think I can be consoled by sweet words, you are an idiot. And if you fancy I'll suffer unrevenged, I'll convince you of the contrary in a very little while. Meanwhile, thank you for telling me your sister-in-law's secret. I swear I'll make the most out of it and stand you aside. What new phase of his character is this? Exclaimed Mrs. Linton in amazement. I've treated you infernally, and you'll take revenge? How will you take it? Ungrateful brute! How have I treated you infernally? I seek no revenge on you, replied Heathcliff less vehemently. That's not the plan. The tyrant grinds down his slaves, and they don't turn against him. They crush those beneath them. You are welcome to torture me to death for your amusement. Only allow me to amuse myself a little in the same style, and refrain from insult as much as you are able. Having leveled my palace, don't erupt me a howl, and complacently admire your own charity in giving me that for a home. If I imagine you really wished me to marry Isabella, I'd cut my throat. Oh, the evil is that I am not jealous, is it? Cried Catherine. Well, I won't repeat my offer of a wife. It is as bad as offering Satan a lost soul. Your bliss lies, like his, in inflicting misery. You prove it. Edgar was restored from the ill temper he gave way at your coming. I begin to be secure and tranquil, and you, restless to know us at peace, appear resolved on exciting a quarrel. Quarrel with Edgar, if you please, Heathcliff, and deceive his sister. You'll hit on exactly the most efficient method of revenging yourself on me. The conversation ceased. Mrs. Linton sat down by the fire, flushed and gloomy. The spirit which served her was growing intractable. She could neither lay nor control it. He stood on the hearth with folded arms, brooding on his evil thoughts, and in this position I left them to seek the master, who was wondering what kept gathering below so long. Ellen, said he when I entered, have you seen your mistress? Yes, she's in the kitchen, sir, I answered. She's sadly put out by Mr. Heathcliff's behavior, and indeed, I do think it's time to arrange his visits on another footing. There's harm in being too soft, and now it's come to this. And I related the scene in the court, and as near as I dared, the whole subsequent dispute. I fancied it could not be very prejudicial to Mrs. Linton unless she made it so afterwards, by assuming the defensive for her guest. Edgar Linton had difficulty in hearing me to the close. His first words revealed that he did not clear his wife of blame. This is insufferable, he exclaimed. It's disgraceful that she should own him for a friend and force his company on me. Call me two men out of the hall, Ellen. Catherine shall linger no longer to argue with the low ruffian. I have humoured her enough. He descended and, bidding the servants wait in the passage went, followed by me, to the kitchen. Its occupants had recommenced their angry discussion. Mrs. Linton, at least, was scolding her with renewed vigor. Heathcliff had moved to the window and hung his head, somewhat cowed by her violent rating apparently. He saw the master first and made a hasty motion that she should be silent, which she obeyed, abruptly on discovering the reason of his intimation. How is this? Said Linton, addressing her. What notion of propriety you have to remain here after the language which has been held to you by that blackguard? I suppose because it's his ordinary talk, you think nothing of it. You are habituated to his baseness, and perhaps imagine if I can get used to it too. Have you been listening at the door, Edgar? Asked the mistress in a tone particularly calculated to provoke her husband, implying implying both carelessness and contempt of his irritation. Heathcliff, who had raised his eyes at the former's speech, gave a sneering laugh at the latter, on purpose, it seemed, to draw Mr. Linton's attention to him. He succeeded, but Edgar did not mean to entertain him with any high flights of passion. I have been so far forbearing with you, sir, he said, quietly. Not that I was ignorant of your miserable, degraded character, but I felt you were only partly responsible for that, and Catherine wishing to keep up your acquaintance, I acquiesced foolishly. Your presence is a moral poison that would contaminate the most virtuous. For that cause, and to prevent worse consequences, I shall deny you hereafter admission into this house, and give notice now that I require your instant departure. 3 minutes' delay will render it involuntary and ignominious. Heathcliff measured the height and breadth of the speaker with an eye full of derision. Caddy, this lamb of yours threatens like a bull, he said. It's in danger of splitting its skull against my knuckles. By God, Mr. Linton, I'm morally sorry that you're not worth knocking down. My master glanced towards the passage and signed me to fetch the men. He had no intention of hazarding a personal encounter. I obeyed the hint, but Mrs. Linton, suspecting something, followed, and when I attempted to call them, she pulled me back, slammed the door, and locked it. Okay, we shall be back in another video. I'm gonna read without recording.